Good morning, Ready First. My name is Colonel Stephen Fairless, and I have the honor of being your brigade commander for the Ready First Combat Team, 1st Brigade, 1st Armored Division. As I mentioned in the first video, the videos that we're shooting, and hopefully you have time to watch from time to time, are not meant to replace doctrine, and nor am I going to read and explain to you doctrine. Rather, based off of doctrine, based off of SOPs, based off of our TTPs, I'm going to offer you an approach, an understanding of the doctrine and the other references we use on a day-to-day basis. First video, we talked about mission command as a philosophy per ADP 6.0. In this video, we're going to discuss company troop battery level training meetings. And for ease and simplicity, I'm just going to refer to them as company training meetings. Now, we don't have a whole heck of a lot of great, relevant, and current doctrine as far as doctrinal references on company training meetings, but we do have some old ones. And sometimes the old manuals are still relevant. We just have to update terms. We're no longer using overhead projector slides, and you can Google what those things are. But nonetheless, the procedures that guide how we conduct a company training meeting are still relevant. So I would commend to you, go ahead and do a search for TC 25-30. You'll find either a 1994 or a 1997 versions. Both of those are great because they're very easy to read how-to manuals. And again, the principles, the foundations are still relevant. So it is useful, and it's a quick read. When I was both a troop and a company commander, had two different commands as a captain, I kept one of those as a hard copy as a reference for myself, not just going into my first command as a captain, but I would periodically review to make sure that I hadn't strayed off the mark as we get comfortable in our roles. Then when I gave up command of a brigade reconnaissance troop and I took an H8C, I pulled that manual out again to make sure that I had not learned bad habits in that previous command that would keep me from adequately running an efficient training meeting at the company level in my second command. So I would recommend that you do that, not just as you're preparing for command, but use it as a guide. Whatever you want to use, but use something as a guide to keep you honest, keep your team straight and efficient in execution of your company training meetings. So we're going to talk about a few things today. We're going to talk about, first of all, the construct of your training planning horizons. Long range, short range, and near term. What do those mean at the battalion lower level for active component? Then we're going to get into a little bit of the construct of a training meeting. How long, who should attend? How long should it last? Then finally, we'll talk about a couple of rules for company commanders, and I would say that these rules absolutely apply for battalion level commanders, brigade commanders, and up. So we'll talk about that. All told, probably take about 10-15 minutes of your time, and hopefully you leave with a better understanding of how to efficiently run a company training meeting. And again, now you have access to a couple old resources that have served generations of leaders well and faithfully. So our planning horizons as we're looking at training. Within the active component at the battalion, squadron level, and below, long-term, long-range planning is typically 1 year. We, as you know, in the military like to use the fiscal year as our construct rather than the calendar year. So 1 fiscal year out from the current status would be considered long-range training or long-range planning. Short range. Short range really falls at the battalion squadron level and below. You're really looking 1 quarter out. Right. Now, as a good practice and also installation specific, sometimes that installation asks you at the battalion squadron level to look 2 quarters out, really to reserve resources. At the company troop battery level, 1 quarter out is about what you can manage. You're aware of what's going on beyond that 1 quarter, but 1 quarter out is appropriate for you to focus in on and consider short range planning. Near term. Near term is in the 4 to 6 week range, right? So obviously we begin to lock in our training and get it approved at the 6th week. By week 4, T+4, we're locking in those training schedules. We're publishing them in DTMS. We're getting them approved by the battalion squadron commander. She or he is signing them, and we're posting those on our training boards in our company troop battery kickoff areas or wherever our training board is for all of our formation to see. So again, those are the planning horizons. So 1 FY, 1 quarter. This marker's not working well for me, so I'll switch back to blue. And then 4 to 6 weeks. Those are your planning horizons. We're going to focus our time and attention, for the most part, within the near term for the purpose of the company training meeting. Now, I don't know how long, well, first of all, my assumption is that you are conducting company training meetings. I know we've been episodic about that in the past, but now that we're in second quarter of fiscal year 21, we're getting back into how we conduct business, standard duty days, battle rhythm events. And all of you should know by now, because you acknowledged my guidance note, that we have a brigade standard company troop battery training meeting window, and that's Thursdays at 1300. Right? How long should it last? If your company training meeting is lasting more than an hour, then we have some efficiencies defined, and I'm hoping to be able to help you do that. 1 hour is the sweet spot. You've got too much to do, and if you can cover this efficiently, you can cover everything you need to do in a very good, well-run company training meeting in 60 minutes. So what are the constructs of a company training meeting? You have 3 phases. First of all, assessment, and we'll get into that in a moment. Okay, coordination. And there's a direct linkage as far as the training horizons, the planning horizons with the coordination and with phase 3 future planning. And it may seem a little bit awkward because we're going to be jumping around in time as we're talking through each one of these phases. So assessment, right? That's the platoon leader, platoon sergeant, and ultimately the first sergeant company commander's assessment of the training that you've already conducted. So that's the platoon leaders and platoon sergeants briefing, training planned and executed, and training planned but not executed. It's important that we cover that as well. We have something to learn from that. We put that training on the schedule for a reason. What kept us from executing it? When must we reschedule that training in future part of this phase in order to accomplish? We had it for a reason. So it's critical that we cover training plan not conducted as well. But for our assessment, what informs our assessments? Well, first of all, we have our training and evaluation outlines, our T&EOs. You have all their execution checklists. The training could have been a staff assistance visit or a command inspection program. It could have been inventories, layouts. It could have been a health and welfare. It could have been maintenance, be it scheduled services, annual or semi-annual, scheduled maintenance, weekly PMCS, command maintenance, or it could have been unscheduled services. We have an NMC pacer. So all that is training, right? So, but again, we're on a time crunch, so we've got to prioritize. Typically, the company commander or the executive officer will prioritize, here's what we're going to cover in the next training meeting. But we have to make an assessment. Ultimately, that leads into recommendations based off of the T&EOs or whatever applicable doctrinal reference we have. How do we assess our training? Because that's going to inform future planning. All right, well, we'll get to that in a moment. Right. So, and then ultimately the company commander will make an assessment, an adjustment to his medal assessment. That's really what we need to get to, because that medal assessment informed by training planned and executed or planned but not conducted is going to inform these discussions here. So now we're going to get into phase 2 coordination. Coordination, first of all, I'm going to look at the near term. So I'm typically, a successful technique is for you to start at 6 weeks out and work your way back in. And part of what you're checking as you're doing that is you're validating where are we in the 8-step training model in order to be able to execute the training that we're planning, that we're requesting to conduct in 6 weeks or 6 weeks from now. And so as I work my way back, if I'm going to do training event X 6 weeks from now, as I work my way back to T+5, T+4, etc., I'm going to make sure that where do I need to hit all 8 steps, or the 7 steps to include planning the AAR of that training 6 weeks from now. Make sure that we've got that lined up. Here's where you're working through the resources. Right? So what are the resources required? When are we coordinating for those resources? When are we required to request those resources? So you're going to work your way back from 6 weeks out all the way to the current week. Then finally, we're going to get into future planning. Informed by our MET assessment. Right? And don't forget, at this point, for that training that's occurring in week 6, you may or may not accomplish that step in week 6 of training that's scheduled there. So in your future planning, you've got to account for that. And then step 8 of the 8-step training model. When are you going to retrain? At least when are you going to block time to be able to refine as you get closer, the retraining? What other training do you want to conduct? Well, what informs that? Well, first of all, there's some sage advice. What's interesting to my boss is fascinating as hell to me. All right, so what's in your boss's, both 1 and 2 levels up, what's the readiness or training guidance that they've published? What are you required to do? What are you required to do by your higher headquarters? What are you required to do by the Army? What are your 350-1 requirements? Do I have scheduled services coming up, annual or semi-annual? Right? All this informs future planning. Okay. Finally, we're going to skip over to these 2 rules because as we're talking future planning, it's really important to consider these 2 rules. Again, this is relevant at every echelon of command. Rule number 1. Rule number 1 sounds shampoo simple. Rule number 1 is commanders will not plan training that they really do not have an intent to execute. And believe it or not, we all do this. We all put too much training on. We have no intention, realistically, to be able to get to that. We're putting a placeholder somewhere. Don't fill up the space and don't take up your time, that limited hour that you have in the meeting and the intellectual time that you have external to the meeting, to plan training or to place training on a schedule that you really don't think you're going to be able to get to. It's got to be realistic. So rule number 2, do not fill every white space on the calendar. Number 1, you're not leaving yourself flexibility based off of the AAR of the training executed to retrain. You're not leaving yourself flexibility in execution for the natural disruptions that are going to occur. I am going to screw with your timeline, right? We all know it. I'm going to do my best not to, but something's going to happen that is going to disrupt your timeline. If you have every minute of the day orchestrated 6 weeks out and longer, you're not leaving yourself flexibility. And worse, you're not leaving your subordinate leaders an opportunity to come to you with training that they want to do, that in support of your priorities, in support of your guidance to them, in support of your intent. So you've got to create white space. That is high fives on the objective. Jerry Bruckheimer movie. If you are able to create white space for your subordinate leaders to make their assessments, to request future training informed by MET assessments, informed by T&EOs, informed by AARs, and retrain those tasks that a previous echelon or previous execution of training found some shortcomings in. So again, those are the 2 rules. Don't plan training that you really don't think that you're going to execute, and don't fill up all the white space for your subordinates. Leave them some white space under your guidance to be able to execute. So who attends? Company leaders, company leadership, right? So that's commander, XO, first sergeant, platoon leaders, platoon sergeants, the master gunner, if you're lucky enough to have one or equivalent of, your supply NCO, your commodity shop NCOs, right? Certainly, absolutely your maintenance team chief, right? If you have attachments, if you're conducting a training meeting when you have task organized attachments, then the leadership from those organizations attend as well. Who else needs to attend? From time to time, you may ask for representation from your battalion or your squadron. So think through who must attend, and then make sure that they're there and make sure that they're prepared. Everyone has homework getting ready for this meeting, if it's only going to take an hour. All right, you answered this. How long does it last? Don't let your training meetings last an hour. Now, we're not bankers, all right? So you're not clocking out right at 60 minutes in mid-sentence. Get efficient enough in your approach to this that you can accomplish all that. And so a rule of thumb, and I'm going to deviate from it, about 15 minutes, about 30 minutes, about 15 minutes. Now, here's the deviation. A great technique, and when we're looking at step 2, the 8-step training model, train certified leaders. When do I do that? For what? You can absolutely, within that 60-minute time block, hit all these, take a little bit of time from each of those, and carve out 5 to 10 minutes within your company training meetings for a young NCO or a young officer to get up and brief her or his training plan, task condition standards for an upcoming training event. That's phenomenal training and development for those junior leaders. And it also helps you validate, train certified leaders, helps you ensure that the leaders who are going to be conducting upcoming training are prepared to execute. Or if not, you have an opportunity to correct it or help them out with resources, whatever the case may be, prior to execution of the training. So we can avoid some self-inflicted AAR notes by incorporating step 2 of the 8-step training model into our training meetings. So those are just a few thoughts on company level training meetings. Again, TC 25-30, do a little bit of research. Both 1994 and 1997 versions are very helpful. They're great step-by-step guidebooks. We have all kinds of other doctrine. We have all kinds of other blog forums, discussion forums, TTPs, formats, all that stuff are out there. The TC I mentioned, it's a really easy, it's a freaking bathroom read. You can knock it out really quick, and it's a very helpful resource. So I look forward to seeing your training meetings as we get out and about. I know Command Sergeant Major Beidel has already been able to attend one. I look forward to seeing your training meetings in action. Use me as a resource. Use your senior leaders, whatever that means to you, as a resource to make sure that you do this efficiently and effectively for you and your formation. Look forward to seeing you out in the field. Ready first.